I love Karyn White. Karyn White, but I had a handful of women who were my crushes, musical crushes. TV crush was probably Elise Neal. That came later. But musical crushes, it was like Terry from In Vogue, Karyn White, and of course Janet Jackson. But Janet was her own solar system. Janet was just, Janet is just, she shouldn't even be in this discussion, man. Janet Jackson is just, that's Janet Jackson. But the one thing I liked about that era back then versus the 2000s is that you could have a Vanessa Williams who was just stunning, but you can also have an Anita Baker. And the thing that kind of disturbed me a bit was, even though I thought all these women were beautiful, like Beyonce and Sierra and Rihanna and A. Marie, they were all beautiful. They are all kind of lighter shade. So the one thing that I do like about this era currently is that you do have a Victoria Monet. Before that, you had a Seven Streeter. Chloe Bailey's kind of mixed up in there a little bit too. And then you still have Kelly Rowland. Like when you see Kelly Rowland, she's absolutely stunning. So I like the fact Black women come in many shapes and very beautiful colors. So the 2000s was a little disturbing to me because I feel like they kind of went too far the other way. And now it seems like they have a nice combination. But let me go back to my 90s self. I love Karyn White. And I came across Karyn White. The first time I saw Karyn White was in the mid 80s. She made a song called The Facts of Love. Saxophonist named Jeff Lorber. And she sang on the song. And Karyn White has this girly, raspy voice when she sings. And I saw her. It's like, I'd never seen her before. It's like, wow, she's really beautiful. Like, she's really cute. But I didn't know who she was. So she disappeared. And then she popped back up with her debut album, produced by the great Reid and Babyface. And this is where we get The Way I Love You, Secret Rendezvous, and Superwoman. And I made a video about Superwoman. And I was mentioning how there's no other version that's better than the Karyn White version. Because when you watch the video, you can really tell like she's tired of, like, I'm not your Superwoman. Like, she's torn by this whole thing of just trying to take care of everybody, and she wasn't taking care of herself. And when I said that, I was like, there's no other better version than the Karyn White version. I respected the Gladys Knight version with Patti LaBelle and Dionne Warwick. People were saying, like, well, what about Gladys Knight version? It's like, listen, listen, as much as I love Karyn White is not a better singer than Gladys Knight, and she's not a better singer than Patti LaBelle. Those two women are Mount Rushmore. Listen, you can have Taylor Swift all you want. I challenge you to put Taylor Swift in a singing competition with Gladys Knight and Patti LaBelle. It's not a competition. It's not a competition. But even though those ladies with Dionne Warwick sang that song with a lot of heart, it's not the same. You felt the pain in Karyn's voice when she originally sang that song. And Karyn, I think I saw her in an interview where she said, like, I wasn't even a mom yet. I wasn't a mom. I wasn't a wife. Like, I was single. I was young. But I sang it from the perspective of watching my mom. And we see this all the time. And we see women do so many things. And as a kid, you kind of take your mom for granted because your mom do everything. Back in the day, they did everything. Your mom cooked, she cleaned, she went to work. She had to take us everywhere. And her and dad, dad, if they were together, they had their stuff. It's like, there was a lot on women. Not to say women aren't busy now, but women did a lot back in the day. And when my mom said she was tired when I was younger, I was like, oh, you're fine. Being a stupid kid. No, like, I wish my mom was still around. I was like, Leah, I'm sorry. Like, I never understood how much you had on your shoulders until now. So Karyn White had that great debut album. Great debut album. In fact, speaking of my mom, so I was a music director in college. So, we would get a lot of free stuff. And in her debut album, there was this beautiful poster of Karyn White when she was in a flowery dress, and I took it home. And I put it on the wall. And my mom was like, oh, my God, I didn't know Karyn White was that built. It's like, yeah, Mom, she is. Oh, my God. So that was the first album. So let me get to the second album. Second album, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis are producing it because Karyn had married Terry Lewis. Now, if you follow me, you know how much I love Jam and Lewis. I love those guys to death. They're my favorite producers of all time. But I wasn't a big of the fan of the second album, Ritual of Love, as I was with the debut album. Whatever magic she had with with LA and Babyface, along with Daryl Simmons, because Daryl Simmons was part of that too as a writer and a producer. It was a little bit different than with Jimmy and Terry. And what happened was, so in this time period, there's Pebbles, right? So Pebbles, her debut album, she works with LA and Babyface on Girlfriends. But she also makes Mercedes Boy with Charlie Wilson. Mercedes Boy to me is Pebbles' best song ever. The song, the way she sang it, the way she looked, the video, it's all amazing. All amazing. That dude in the video as a dancer later became a woman. That was crazy too, down the road. But yeah, that Mercedes Boy video, the Mercedes Boy song is my favorite Pebbles song ever. So, but when she married LA, that's her second album. LA and Babyface produced the whole album, and that Giving You the Benefit was really good. And I think Call It. I think it's been a long time, but there was no song like Mercedes Boy. And as much as she was great, that second album was really good for Pebbles. She didn't have a Mercedes Boy, and I felt like she should have maybe made a few more songs with Charlie Wilson at that time period. But Charlie Wilson was going through his own stuff then. On the opposite side, Karyn White, she's with Terry Lewis now. And I was so mad at Terry too when that happened. It's like, oh my God, damn it, you took my woman. But God bless you. Well, she makes her second album, and that's where Romantic was a great looking video. The song was good. She looked great in it. The reason I'm talking about this today, I was watching MTV Classics, and The Way I Feel About You was on. Beautiful video. Karyn White's in a French maid's outfit. She looks beautiful. The song is really, really good. There's nothing wrong with this album. If this was Karyn White's if Ritual of Love was Karyn White's first album, it's a solid debut album. The problem was there wasn't a Superwoman on that album. And it's not Jamie Lewis's fault, because when they worked with Janet Jackson, they made nothing but Superwoman songs. Like, they made nothing but classic cuts with Janet Jackson, right? But it's just, as much as I love that Ritual of Love album, they didn't have a Superwoman track on it. And when I look at LA and Face, so LA and Face, they start LaFace afterwards. And then Toni Braxton pops up because they do the Boomerang soundtrack. And part of me feels like Toni Braxton got some of the stuff that if they were to work with Karyn White, I think Toni got that stuff. Because at that time, I think they wanted to work with Anita Baker, and that fell through. Because the song they did with Toni, Love Should Have Brought You Home, last night on Boomerang, they wrote that for Anita Baker, but it didn't work out. So Toni got that. And I think a lot of those songs that Toni has on her great debut album, her great album was great as well. I think some of those songs, if they were still working with Karyn White, I think Karyn White could have got some of those songs. But you never know. You never know. You never know. Like, you know. But the thing that happened with Karyn White, so what happened with Karyn White was, like I said, she popped up in the mid-'80s. And something happened in the early 90s, it happened to Anita Baker and Regina Belle, is that this whole hip-hop thing came up. So you got In Vogue, who was basically four Karyn Whites, they popped up. And then Mary J. Blige just blew everything up with What's the 411, and then we get Brandy and Monica and Adina Howard, and everything switched. So a lot of ladies who came through in the 80s and in the kind of early 90s, they kind of got pushed down for like Mariah and Mary J. Janet was fine. Janet sustained it. Whitney Houston was okay for a little while too. Whitney was able, the greats were able to sustain it. But if you were kind of great, you didn't last as long. So, but Karyn White is still great. I love Karyn White. Those first two albums were great. The first album was excellent. The second album was very good. But man, whenever a Karyn White video is on, I'm watching it. So this brings a good question. Like, who do you think is a very underrated singer of the 90s, especially in R&B? I'm saying Karyn White is very underrated. But you could also argue that Toni Braxton is underrated. Because when we talk about the 90s, we talk about like Whitney, Mariah, Mary J. Blige, Brandy, Monica. But I think sometimes Toni, she had a ton of hits, man, in the 90s. I think sometimes we forget because we talk about her dating, her marriage, her bankruptcies, and all this, her outfits. But sometimes we forget like what a great singer, what a great performer, and what a great song she made with LA and Babyface and a few other producers. So shout out to Karyn White. You know, she married Terry. They got divorced. They had a kid. Man. But he was married to her. At least at least that happened. I didn't get that far. Tell me your favorite Karyn White song and tell me who is most underrated female artist in R&B in the 90s.